as you know, on this program, we talk a fair amount about technology, about tech, and its the way it interacts with the economy, with politics, with society. And our next guest writes about that a lot too. So we thought we'd like to have a chat with her. Lauren C. Williams is a tech reporter at Think Progress, and she's written about recently about a couple topics that are of interest to it. We'll get to as many as we can in our allotted time. But first of all, Lauren, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, okay, let's start with this. You wrote a piece recently about Twitter. You know, a lot of people, we're in a funny historical moment with Twitter because a lot of nastiness goes on there. I honestly, you know, for my own work, I feel I have to maintain a Twitter presence, but sometimes I feel like taking a bath after I've been in there. And now, to make it even more complex, we have a president who's very active on Twitter, including, I think, hassling people a little bit. So what's the status there? I mean, Twitter is trying to respond. We've had horrendous examples of people, especially women, I think, who have been horrifically harassed on Twitter. It gets unpleasant at times for any of us who are at all active there. First of all, let's start with this. How bad is the problem?
Well, the problem is, pervasive. It's extraordinarily bad, and it's something that Twitter has been having to deal with, honestly, since its inception. But particularly in the last 5 years or so, public criticism has grown. The company was initially very reluctant to implement policies that pretty much more or less punished people who were abusive on the platform. They took more of a laissez-faire, free speech, pro-free speech stance. But as public criticism has grown, as news of Twitter's harassment problem has grown, the company has taken more concrete steps to making sure that that people feel safe online. And over the last couple of years in particular, they've really stepped it up. The most recent being a new tool that basically hides replies that they consider to be irrelevant or that could be potentially abusive. So when you look at your notifications, if you dare, you won't see those mean or threatening messages that you typically would see in the past.
Yeah, and I want to get to that for a second, but I'm interested in the kind of the history of why they didn't act sooner. My sense following it has been that I think Jack Dorsey is still the CEO. He left, he came back. But my sense was that they had a kind of libertarian ideology that said, well, the community will police itself and we don't want to do anything because that's too hierarchical. Is that true, you think? Is that what they were holding back for?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of times with these social media platforms, the companies they're very wary of having ruling with an iron fist. They don't want to have rules that can come off as restrictive towards anybody's liberties or speech particularly. And so that's why there's kind of been this slow progress in terms of understanding that, for the company to understand that the abuse is real and that it's not just people having a debate, that you do have people who just create accounts for the purpose of trolling or spamming an individual, and that usually the people who get that sort of abuse the most are going to be women, people of color, and people in other marginalized communities.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Lauren, and I think it's such an important point. I mean, I get hassled a lot, but I am not the member of a member of a marginalized community, and I don't get hassled in that context. Which one of my pet peeves, and you're a writer, is here's my invention, Lauren C. Williams at Think Progress. Tell me what you think. I have an app idea, and I'm going to share it with you and the world right now, which is that if somebody writes something, you're not allowed to comment on it on social media until you answer a quiz about what's in it. So that, you know, my personal beef is, and it's trivial compared to the horrors other people have gone through, is when people say, yeah, well, what about X, Y, and Z? Bet you didn't think of that, and it's your second paragraph. You address it. But we're really talking about horrific stuff that's happened where people have been threatened with death, they've been threatened with violence, or threatened with rape, they've been horrible racist stuff. So how exactly does this app, does Twitter now plan to address this? How does this work? Do you know the technical details of how it decides something should be silenced and all that?
Well, basically, they're trying to block the messages. You know, it's less technical and more so just like protecting the individual user, and just kind of looking at what they consider to be low quality tweets. So these are comments that don't really add anything to a conversation. There are trigger words. That's also a feature that's available through their filtering system. And you know, they're trying to make sure that what you do see, like this is like constructive criticism, that you're actually having a conversation on the platform rather than trying to defend yourself, or you know, having to deal with threats that have honestly nothing to do with your work or whatever stated opinion you have on the site.
And is it an algorithm or something? I mean, is it something that we can see so we know what the logic is, that how it decides to filter something out?
Well, it's gonna be a feature, and I don't believe it's quite available yet. They plan on revealing it, making it available soon. So basically, when you go to your mentions, you're going to see your high quality mentions, and then you're going to see there's going to be a banner that says low quality replies, and those abusive tweets are supposed to be in the low quality reply. So in order for you to see those, you would have to click on it, and like then there's going to be a drop down menu that shows you, you know, just replies that could probably range from being, you know, somebody reacting to just your headline that they didn't like, or to, you know, more nefarious threats of violence.
Right. I'm sure it's kind of like it's levels that go from that to you're stupid to F words to things about your gender or race to active threats. So, well, I mean, I support the concept. You know, I mean, I think it's, you know, I think there's always a struggle between individual liberty and collective safety. And I think, you know, I've talked to people who've just gone through horrifying experiences, and we now have the president and the right wing in particular eager to set troll armies on anyone who expresses unpopular opinions. And unfortunately, I think it's all too common in a number of areas of society. So it's an interesting story. Well, let's pivot, if we can, Lawrence C. Williams, to another topic you wrote about last week, and that is how Uber drivers are dealing with and protesting Trump's immigration bans. Now, many people reacted to Uber's response to the immigration ban and other issues by deleting Uber. I'm one of them. And, you know, my personal feeling has always been, you know, taxis first, then if necessary, Uber, but I switched over to Lyft. So, first of all, if you wouldn't mind just giving folks a little background on the story.
So basically, there, as a result of the immigration and refugee bans that President Donald Trump signed, not last week, but the week before, there were protests at different airports, protesting the fact that people were being detained, even when they had valid visas. And as a result, particularly in New York City taxis decided to stop service in support of the people who were being detained. Then Uber responded by saying, we're going to drop surge pricing, and we're going to still be in operation. But when they did this, they didn't come out with a statement saying where they fell in terms of the ban.
Right.
And
And
that
so
angered.
just to jump in a little bit, so it looked a lot like they were trying to break the taxi strike. They didn't say anything in support of the objectives of the taxi strike. And then, in context, at the time, the CEO of Uber, Travis Kalanick, was also on Trump's Business Advisory Council, right? So a lot of people got upset.
Yes, a lot of people got upset, particularly because Uber was not coming out with a stance that clearly said the bans were wrong, they were inhumane, and their competitor Lyft had done that by donating or pledging to donate $1 million to the ACLU's lawsuit, which is going to target the constitutionality of the immigration bans. And so when your chief competitor makes a bold move like that for Uber, it didn't look good, because the statements that CEO Travis Kalanick put out weren't as clear. It didn't draw a bright line. And then people took to social media. Delete Uber became an instant hit, and people flooded it, talking about their stories and how they're going to delete the app. And it got so bad that the company had to tweak its internal system to handle this inundation of people requesting to delete their accounts. And so they kind of scrambled as a result, trying to deal with this mass dissatisfaction with the company's public stance on the issue.
And then and by the way, I was a little late in terms of actually deleting my account. I deleted the app right away, and I got a message saying, "We'll get back to you." So they haven't even finished deleting my account yet. But and then in response, so Travis Kalanick left the advisory council, right? They've tried to make up the difference since then, right?
Yeah, so it was a week-long process. So the protest started on Sunday, and Travis Kalanick stepped down from his post on Trump's business advisory board. He stepped down from that on Thursday. So there was still protests ongoing in the days in the days in between, and then also. There were some attempts in between for the company to kind of push forth a message, actually explicitly denouncing the bans. When people were trying to delete their accounts, they would say, "Yes, we're going to delete your account, but we want you to know that we're with you, that the immigration ban is wrong." And so users were getting these messages as they were trying to go through the process and delete Uber accounts. And so there was a lot of shuffling going along before Kalanick actually decided to step down.
And do we know what's happened since then in terms of membership? Have any people come back? Have they largely stayed away, or is that not known at the present?
It's not really known. Honestly, from talking to Uber drivers, they noticed a downtick. I was able to talk to 3 different drivers, one in New York, one in San Francisco, and one in Seattle. And all of them, while they talked to me for 30 minutes or more each, they're waiting for fares.
Mm-hmm.
They're not they weren't necessarily being flooded with Uber customers. And so they're feeling it. There's definitely an impact, but at the end of the day, which a lot of them pointed out to me, is that Uber is the biggest rideshare company in the country, and so they have a large share of the market. So even though people are maybe prioritizing other companies like Lyft, which was shown. In terms of Lyft's rise on the App Store, I think it rose to the number 3 app in the App Store, while Uber dropped, I think, to the teens. While people are prioritizing other apps, and the drivers in some cases are prioritizing business from other apps, it's almost like you're not going to completely be able to get away from Uber because of its sheer size and market reach. because Lyft is not in every single city.
Yeah, to a certain extent, the market is going to have to dictate that. So, in closing, we have about 30 seconds left. I don't know about you, but I think that whatever happens from here on in, it's a success story because people spoke up in a way that was civil and yet clear that they objected to the stance that Uber took. And it made an impact, and it was heard. I don't know, in 30 seconds or so, what's your closing thought on that?
I definitely think that it's an example of democracy at work. The government instituted a policy. The public reacted by exercising the First Amendment right to protest. Then when a business did not respond the way they wanted them to, then they decided to take their business elsewhere. I mean, like, this is actually what democracy is about. And that's what we've seen here. And we'll continue to see how the public reacts going forward.
It's what democracy is about, and it's how free markets work. So, Lauren C. Williams, tech reporter at Think Progress, thanks for covering these stories, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.